From fear of death to calmness, the only way is to actively think, explore, and practice. I will share with you some tips for overcoming the fear of death. These methods have been found to be very helpful to clients in counseling. You will find that the fear of death often involves not only the fear of death itself, but also many things in life. 1. Recognize the specific content of your fear of death. The things we fear often trigger strong emotional responses that make us instinctively avoid thinking about them. When many people talk about their fear of death, a large part of that fear is caused by not being able to look it in the face. One of the most effective ways to overcome the fear of death is to face it head-on. It sounds counterintuitive, but it really works. When fear strikes, stop all activities at hand, close your eyes, and take your fear seriously. See what it is like, what it reminds you of, what image comes to your mind, or something it recalls. If you do, you'll often find that your fear of death isn't all about death itself. Your memories and experiences can cause you to have certain guesses or expectations about your own future death. You may find yourself terrified of going through the pain a deceased loved one went through before dying, or always flashing back to a certain scene in a certain movie, believing that's what happened to you as well. Death, an essentially neutral event, can be experienced in your consciousness as a negative and horrific phenomenon. Getting to the bottom of what the fear of death is can help you begin to dismantle that construct. Maybe in the end, you will still be afraid of death, but you will only be afraid of death, not the pain and distress that comes from avoiding death. 2. Accept the reality of the death phenomenon. As children, we like to imagine nature as a benevolent mother who nourishes all things. But nature is not as benevolent as you think. It creates life and it destroys life, and in a million different ways. If you watch various wildlife documentaries on a regular basis, death will be very familiar to you. Death happens at any time, and it is an inevitable part of the cycle of life in nature. It's just that animals don't have self-awareness, so they don't worry about inevitable death from the perspective of their own survival. They will only make an instinctive fight or flight response when death comes. Because human beings have self-awareness, they have an anticipation of future death. Because we are worried and scared about what will happen, we make things up about death, whether we mean to or not. This phenomenon can be explained by emotional reasoning. Strong emotions can affect our cognitive ability and push our thinking in a direction consistent with the emotional experience. So when you are afraid of something, you think it is a terrible thing, and you find all kinds of evidence to prove it. But the phenomenon of death is essentially neutral. It is not good or bad, harsh or benevolent. If you open your eyes and look for death, you will find that it happens all the time, and when you look more, you will no longer feel that death is an exception, a failure, and something that should not happen. On the contrary, death is death, and its nature does not change because of our thoughts or desires. In this way, death has a reassuring sense of certainty. 3. Understanding human vulnerability. In many cases, our fear of death is actually directed at human fragility. Humans are very fragile creatures. If you haven't realized this, think about the growth of a human child. He could get sick, be bitten by dogs, bullied by other children, be abducted, hit by a car, poisoned by food, or choked to death, and in the face of everything, he was almost powerless to resist. You also don't think adults are safer? On the one hand, our physical body is very fragile, and it will fall apart with a little strong impact or injury. On the other hand, people have a very arrogant, careless, and stupid side, which will greatly increase the possibility of our injury. The construction process of human civilization is based on the underlying principle of forgetting death and fragility. We have built orderly cities and built infrastructure such as healthcare, social security, and communications to minimize the risk of death. We ensure an abundance of food and resources through industrial and agricultural production. But that doesn't change the vulnerability of humanity itself. If you take a closer look at human nature, you will find that human beings have an evil, selfish, hateful, and aggressive side that can lead to deliberate abuse and killing. We are all fragile in terms of physical structure and behavioral thinking. If God designed us, then the design idea is obviously not thick blood, iron head, and strong. So if you can always remember this vulnerability, perhaps death will not seem so abrupt and unacceptable. 4. Pursue the meaning of life. Viktor Frankl's Living the Meaning of Life recounts his first-hand experience of death in Nazi concentration camps. He found that in extreme circumstances, meaning is an important factor in life and death. Those who are relatively healthy but cannot find the meaning of life will die quickly, while those who have the meaning of life will be able to show amazing vitality and survive the inhumane situation. Meaninglessness and emptiness can magnify the fear of death, and having a clear meaning in life can help you see death as part of that meaning. If you don't have any goals or pursuits in life, just live for the pleasure and satisfaction of the moment, and you'll be more afraid of death. Because day-to-day sensory gratification just delays confronting and thinking about death and does not bring about any real cognitive integration. Our society encourages instant gratification in many ways, which blinds us to the value of long-term pursuit and persistence. Meaning makes us willing to endure temporary pain and pressure to accomplish some longer-term goals. Once you have had such an experience, you will have more confidence in life and yourself, and you will not feel that when you face the limitations of life. I am a completely passive character. A simple thought experiment: would you rather live alone in a hospital bed for many years, or die in the company of many family and friends? We think it's always better to live than to die, but that assumes that your life is worth living. What makes life worth living? The most critical factor is connection with others. Why is it that the worst punishment in prison is solitary confinement? Because people cannot stand isolation. We break down both mentally and physically. So if you are alive but there are not too many people in your life who care about you, this kind of life may not be worth lingering on. High-quality relationships are one of the most effective antidotes to the fear of death. Having someone you care about can bring a strong sense of meaning. A good relationship can provide you with a lot of emotional support, and the joy and rewards of family, friendship, and love can balance the sense of loss and emptiness of death. Humans evolved in gregarious environments, so the quality of social relationships can have a huge impact on our perceptions. Therefore, people who are deeply in love will feel that there are too many things to do with you, but this life is too short. 6. Make a clear and specific future plan. We have an instinctive fear of two things: death and the unknown. When you have no bottom line about the direction and development of your life, how can you be sure that the end of your life can make you calm? I have found that when many clients start discussing death anxiety with me, what they really want to discuss is uncertainty about life. With the rapid development of society, the traditional way of life is gradually disintegrating, and the trajectory of life is becoming more and more uncertain. If you feel helpless and confused about all your options right now and don't think you can find answers, it's easy to think that you'll be in this state of confusion until you die. But the truth is, you won't be confused all the time. As long as you face life seriously and responsibly, most questions will be answered to some extent before you die, and then you can leave. But such results will not come to you. You need to really start trying to solve the confusion in life instead of pretending to be worried and entangled. You need to make a specific life plan. You can first find a goal, such as what you want your life to be in 5 years or 10 years from now. Clearly describe that ideal state, and then infer what you have to do in the present moment to get there. Make a detailed list of what you are going to do, with all the necessary steps, strategies, methods, and resources. When this kind of planning becomes a habit, the unknowns in life won't make you afraid of death as much. 7. Make the most of the wisdom of death. Medieval monks in Europe liked to keep a human skull on their desks. I do this not to refresh my mind but to remind myself that death exists when thinking about everything. The phenomenon of death can be a great source of wisdom and revelation. The limitation of thinking is that it always has blind spots, and sometimes we don't even realize we have blind spots. And death itself is our blind spot in many things. So, always remembering death is to have the possibility to jump out of your own narrowness and discover blind spots and new perspectives. It is for this reason that various thought experiments on death are very impactful and revealing. If you only had 24 hours left in your life, what would you want to do? Imagine your life story is a book. How would you like to write the last page of the book? Our bigotry, stubbornness, selfishness, and greed all seem trivial in the face of death. Death can help us clarify our value choices, what is important and what is not, and it is easy to get the answer by using death as a touchstone. 8. See the effect of death on the living. To people, death has a huge impact, so death is always just the end of life, and it is an important reminder to the living. I participated in the cremation ceremony of a relative. The relatives at the scene had not seen each other for a long time because of past disputes, and they did not like each other after meeting. But the moment the relatives' remains entered the incinerator, everyone put aside their dislikes and wept bitterly. After crying, everyone decided to sit down to eat and chat, and they reopened the relationship. This experience was very shocking to me because I saw with my own eyes how the most stubborn and irreconcilable person in the world was instantly turned by death. Death is the end for the dead person, but it can be the beginning of many things for those around him. If you die one day, how will it affect those around you? What if they miss you? What will your departure encourage and inspire them to do? There are a lot of things worth exploring and discussing, even when you're still alive and well. Maybe in the process of discussion, you will understand more about how you should live and how you should die. 9. In addition to thinking about death, try to experience death as much as possible. Human thinking is limited because our cognitive values and embodied values are always different. In other words, people say one thing and do another. This is not because we are hypocritical, but because we can think and behave very differently in different emotional states. In Zhang Asia's Blind Date and Love, I was very impressed by a small scene. A big boy saw a coffin in the countryside, lay down in it for fun, and then suddenly couldn't help crying. If possible, I will encourage everyone to lie in the coffin for a while because I am sure that this trip will make you experience many emotions that you have never experienced before and think a lot of things you can't think of or dare not think about. If there are no such conditions, another good way is to visit the cemetery. You can often go to visit the graves of your relatives or take advantage of the cemeteries next to churches and temples as a must-see tourist attraction. I once spent more than 2 hours wandering around a mountain filled with graves in Kyoto, Japan. There is a special silence in the cemetery, like the eternal silence of your senses and soul after your death. Because of the environment and atmosphere, when thinking about death and life in a place like this, your mind will become more open and deeper. Also, take some time to think when you attend the funeral, and try not to miss the opportunity to go to the crematorium to see the deceased and follow-up burial. Maybe the first time you will be emotionally broken, but after a few more visits, you will gradually get used to the existence of death, and even start to like the extreme sobriety and humility in the face of death. 10. Relive your golden years. A considerable part of the fear of death is actually aimed at the foreshadowing before death, that is, the old life in which the body, mind, and soul are constantly deteriorating. In the imagination of many people, old age is boring, limited, meaningless, and awaited death, but it may only be because the elderly around you are living that way. I once had a chat with a psychology doctoral student who specializes in the lives of the elderly. Student studying death, and she told me that elderly people in nursing homes actually have very different living conditions. Some people read books and newspapers every day, do various things, and live a full life because their attitude when they were young was like this. And for those who have a passive attitude towards life, old age is naturally dull and boring. Although physical limitations will become more obvious, aging does not mean that you will lose everything and give up everything. We rarely talk about planning for retirement or old age, maybe because we feel like that's a long way off. But in fact, what kind of life you choose today will shape your state in the last decades of your life. You can age gracefully, or you can make the most of your retirement time to complete your bucket list. I recommend you watch the documentary The Fruit of Life, which will give you a richer imagination of old age. I hope that the information provided will bring you closer to at least understanding, if not overcoming, your fear of death. Do not forget to share this video and subscribe for more videos about phobias and fears.